Among all the conversations celebrating Daft Punk's career since their breakup announcement, the one piece of their work that seems to be almost instantly dismissed is their score for the 2010 movie Tron Legacy. Considering that their other albums are as good as they are and they're not film composers, I completely understand why a soundtrack they did for a critically panned Disney movie is slotted at the bottom of almost every list I've seen. But I think it's brushed aside way too quickly, like Legacy itself when it first came out. I was certainly ready to dislike it when I saw its Rotten Tomatoes rating, but it unexpectedly became one of my favorite movies, and the music is one of the main reasons why. Even on their quote-unquote worst album, they created a soundtrack that still defines the film over a decade later. And in Daft Punk's overall discography, it's the creative bridge between their previous studio albums and the records they would make after its completion. This all being said, I want to dive into a few of the film's musical moments and explore how the progression of the music enhances Legacy's visual experience. But first, I think it's important to talk a bit about the person responsible for that visual experience and why he wouldn't accept a score from anyone other than Daft Punk. Before he directed Tron Legacy, Joseph Kosinski made a name for himself in the advertising world, directing commercials in a noticeably darker and moodier style than his counterparts. That first really dramatic commercial for Taco Bell nacho fries, that was him. But the ad that inspired Disney to choose the David Fincher protege was an uncommissioned spot he created for a made-up Apple product that placed users inside digital versions of movie scenes, a concept reminiscent of the original Tron. It's fitting that a guy who had never directed a feature film wanted two guys who had never composed film music to do a score for him. But Kosinski saw in Daft Punk what Disney saw in him, a skill set that could help make the new version of Tron unique and exciting. Even so, Disney didn't want the group doing any of the film's music besides the EDM tracks for the club scene. That's why they had to meet with established composers like Hans Zimmer and Christoph Beck to discuss an arrangement where Daft Punk would do the dance music, but the main composer would do most of the actual work.
Electrify the boys and girls if you'd be so kind.
But Daft Punk was adamant about creating the movie's entire body of music, and eventually they got their wish. But they still needed an orchestrator who could translate their synthesizer approximations of orchestral music into actual arrangements, and for that they got Beck's former assistant Joseph TRAPANESE. TRAPANESE became a vital piece of the equation, the bridge between Daft Punk's prior expertise and the finished score. Together they worked at Hollywood's Henson Studios, which would eventually be used to help create the chart-topping album Random Access Memories after Tron was finished. That album would be known for its masterful blend of electronic music and disco. But for the Legacy score, they trekked closer to the footsteps of Vangelis' Blade Runner score. From the outset, Daft Punk and company knew that for their hybrid-style score to work, the electronic elements and the orchestra needed to be treated not as two separate entities, but as one complete musical body. That mentality is made clear in Legacy's first few minutes. The Son of FLYNN features arpeggiated synths that place the electronic sound front and center. And French horns at the edges of the arrangement come in to support their foundation. It introduces us to the real life of main character Sam Flynn, but minutes later when he stumbles into the digital world of the grid, we get a more balanced blend on the track Recognizer. Soft strings establish a bass line that's quickly handed off to the synths, and we get a more alarming shift when we see what's overhead. The music does a great job highlighting the Recognizer's orientation on the screen. The French horn blast hits as the now full-frame ship bears down on Sam and engulfs his field of view. While it flies around, the arrangement rises a few octaves, which makes the ship feel weightless and invites us to admire and explore this new world we've entered. We transition to a more electronic-focused arrangement on The Game Has Changed, which is probably my personal favorite on the album because of the first 10 seconds alone. Those muffled synths make way for arcade-sounding hits, which match up well with the pixelated, liquidy deaths we're watching on screen. But shortly after, we get the complete opposite of what the Tron filmmakers expected in a Daft Punk score with Outlands, where we hear a more full-bodied orchestra. Besides the strings, we start to hear some higher brass parts as we again watch Sam get ragdolled around the grid. Of course, it wouldn't be Daft Punk if there weren't a few tracks that sounded like, well, Daft Punk. Fittingly, the songs where electronic elements dominate come during the scene where the group makes its cameo. The track End of Line is unapologetically them. Although it's always nighttime in this world, the song successfully soundtracks the grid's version of nightlife, constantly stacking synth lines of different octaves over each other, something that fits the club's mind-numbing atmosphere. When a fight breaks out, we switch to the soundtrack's lead single, DEREZZED. The tempo increases, the synths are chaotic, and the track's bouncy feel captures the franticness of the action on the club floor. Daft Punk lets their electronic expertise take over, leading to the album's most widely known track. But for all the highlights in this score, the track that I think best represents the blend they were going for is one called Solar Sailor. It's buried in the track list, but to me it stands out in the way it builds layers of sound on a pretty simple 15-second loop. The first half of the song is propelled by a low synth bass line, with a descending pattern that signals the end of one loop iteration and the start of another. Once the loop is established, we hear the strings start to fight to the front, eventually drowning out the first bass line and working with a new, higher bass line to carry the arrangement forward. Then, the strings join together with the emerging brass to take control. And for good measure, quiet flutes help the orchestra dominate the once synth-driven melody. Solar Sailor is a perfect snapshot of the entire score. The way it stacks the digital and the orchestral together is a testament to the attention that Daft Punk and TRAPANESE devoted to the subtleties of the music. These qualities shine throughout the album, even in big moments like the movie's climactic track, FLYNN Lives, which leaves electronics out of the arrangement in favor of powerful brass and soft woodwinds. The Legacy score worked because Daft Punk was willing to enter a film composer's mindset and didn't have the desire to just stroll in and throw a violin over a generic beat. They worked on nothing else for almost 2 years, and that dedication to the task in front of them is one of the big reasons why their work is so widely praised. The score could have easily been an unrelenting barrage of digital noise, but instead it built the electronics and the orchestra together from the ground up and struck a balance the group looked for in everything they did. It may not be as prominent a feature in their work as it should be, but regardless, it was a perfect score for a digital frontier.